Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Age of Empires for PC. This is a real-time strategy game developed by Ensemble Studios and published by Microsoft in 1997. And it was one of the first real-time strategy games I ended up getting. It wasn't that I didn't play real-time strategy games before then. It was just this was the first one I ended up getting the full version of. I did play previous games like Close Combat, for instance, but I didn't really get into the genre until Age of Empires came out, and specifically the expansion pack to it. But this was one of the first real-time strategy games I got, so can I cut through the nostalgia and actually get to whether it's actually a good game or not? Well, let's find out. Now, at the time, the visuals were actually pretty well done. Sprite work in general was nice and detailed. It looked very pleasant. And for the time, you could actually get this up to a pretty high resolution. So, while that is a massively small resolution by today's standards, it was still pretty impressive to look at back in the day. Animations looked really nice and fluid. Things flowed nicely, looked fairly realistic in terms of the animations and such. And there were a lot of visual touches here and there, like birds will fly across the screen and such like that, so that it becomes more than just this kind of static board where you might have a few little things moving here and there, but they're all on command. But this one actually had a pretty good presentation about it. And likewise, the sound design was pretty well done as well. You had pretty good music. Some of the tracks were fairly weak, but for the most part, it was pretty decent music. The sound effects themselves were actually really well done. They all sound nice and appropriate. You get that nice metal clanging on metal, and all the sounds sound like they fit whatever the action is. Like, say, somebody's shooting a bow. It does sound like someone's shooting a bow. It doesn't sound like somebody's just, like, twanging on a guitar or something like that. And then you have a little bit of voice acting. It does have voice-acted taunts, which are actually pretty amusing. They're just cheesy stuff, and you could tell the developers just kind of had fun with that. But you also have some basic voice acting for the units when you click on them. They'll be like, Rogan? And stuff like that. Just basically nonsensical gibberish. And one of the most famous ones is, Wololo, which is what the priests say when you're converting somebody. But in general, the presentation was pretty good at the time, although there were other games that did outclass it. Now, Age of Empires was released in a time where, in general, strategy games didn't have much of a storyline. If they did, it was mostly backstory, and then it was all about the gameplay, or if they did have a involving storyline, it really was kind of a backseat to the gameplay as well. And this is acknowledged in Age of Empires because you have campaigns, but they're basically rise to power storylines. It's basically just how a given civilization rises to power and defeats its enemies and such. And in general, it's just kind of a series of historical battles or events loosely based on actual historical events. So this game is grounded fairly deeply in the history. It does have stuff that would have been around at the time that they're portraying, which is, of course, ancient times. And it goes for a relatively realistic route because it doesn't have, like, mythological elements or ultra-high technology. It is a historical strategy game. And they actually did a really cool thing where they include this kind of encyclopedia thingy. I don't remember exactly what it calls it. But basically, if you want to learn more about, say, slingers, for instance, they're a unit in the game. You can click on the question mark, and then you can click on your slingers, and it will bring up a little bitty window that says basically what this unit is and what it's good against, that sort of thing. And it also has a more info thing. If you click on that, it takes you to this encyclopedia thingy, where it gives you a more detailed, yet still fairly concise historical background on the thing you just asked it about. And this is actually pretty cool because it allows you to kind of learn about history without really feeling like it's just a history lesson, like it's like you're going to class or something. It just melds with the game, and you're like, well, if you read this sort of thing, then you can kind of develop tactics based on it too. Which is another thing that's kind of cool about this, because while it is grounded in historical fact, you don't necessarily have to use everything the way it would have been used in history. So, looking at this history can actually give you ideas on using these out of the box, using them kind of in roles where they wouldn't necessarily be common. Like, say you got slingers, just use a crap ton of them, for instance, to kind of annoy the enemy until your heavy troops get in there or something like that. Because they're one of your primary ranged units up until you get archers, basically. But still, it's cool to see that kind of stuff in there, and it really did kind of help get a lot of people into history if they played this game and enjoyed that kind of aspect. That said, despite being basically historically grounded, despite doing that pretty well, it does get the balancing a little bit askewed. And what I mean by that is, while each civilization does draw from the same unit pool, there are no unique units in this game at all. Just a basic set of units, and some civilizations have some units, some have others, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. And that was kind of the problem, because there were basically one or two civilizations that people would jump into and really go crazy with, like, say, the Byzantines. Or, not the Byzantines, the Babylonians. Sorry, I'm thinking of something else. The Babylonians, for instance, have the most access to everything in this game. And so when you go in there and you choose one of the other civilizations, unless you really know how to play them pretty well, it's kind of awkward, because like, say the Babylonians, they're kind of the jack of all trades, whereas the other civilizations really kind of have to specialize. And while that's a cool idea, in Age of Empires 1, it really didn't balance out all that well, because you'd have one or two civilizations where if somebody played as them, they would just completely dominate the other civilizations. So that presented a problem. But that said, you did have to contend with a lot of other weird issues too. Like, say if you played Deathmatch, for instance. Deathmatch is a mode where it gives you a crap ton of resources, and you basically just kind of either free-for-all or just team fight or whatever. And you can do it against people or the AI. And when you did it against the AI, basically they would be in the Iron Age, which is the highest age you can do. You have 4 ages, starting at the Stone Age and you go up to the Iron Age. They would be in the Iron Age within a couple of minutes and have just immense amounts of ballista towers and catapults and ballistae, which are basically the most overpowered units in the entire game. I mean, they're siege weapons. So they would have tons of these, and you'd be struggling to fight that, because while they wouldn't necessarily go into your territory unless they were basically hard AI, they would all just kind of congregate, and whenever you try to push into their territory, you wouldn't be able to. And so that was a pretty big problem with the AI in Age of Empires 1, and that became extremely annoying. So most people really don't play Deathmatch unless they're playing against other people. And that's kind of understandable, because people don't play the same as the AI. The AI kind of cheats, to be honest with you. So you have a little bit of a balancing issue. And the deathmatch mode isn't really that great. But you can create your own scenarios, which is really cool. It's really nice that they have this editor in there. And it's actually pretty easy to use. I mean, you go in there, and everything's laid out pretty well. There are some things here and there that you're kind of confused on. But once you get used to it, the editor is actually pretty intuitive, and it's really nice to have that. That said, there's not a heck of a lot you can do with it. I mean, while you can create your own scenarios and such, and actually create your own campaigns, it isn't that great to produce your own stuff. Because, in general, your quality is not going to be that great. It's not going to be up to snuff with the rest of the stuff that Ensemble's done. Now, granted, there are, of course, scenarios and such that are really well done, but they're few and far between, and they're pretty hard to find these days. Partly because really not that many people played Age of Empires back in the day and really enjoyed it. It wasn't until a little later on that they really got into it. Now, Age of Empires did fairly well on its release, but it really hasn't aged well at all. That's the main problem I have with it. You tend to find that your units will get lost behind buildings. What I mean by that is that they don't have like an outline or anything when you have them behind a building, so you have to kind of guess, and so that's kind of rough. Another thing, because the civilizations are pretty unbalanced, you have that issue of some civs with better technology are just going to wipe the floor with everybody else, because they get access to research that gives them better abilities to micromanage and such. And this game becomes pretty heavy on the micromanagement. And especially people who don't know what they're doing, who haven't played many real-time strategy games before, are going to be really daunted by it. But the single player is actually really fun when it works, and when you're not dealing with those balancing issues. So this is a game that really hasn't aged well, but if you're going to get it for the expansion pack, because that really helps a lot. I will talk about that later on when I review that expansion. But this game by itself, I really can't recommend anymore, despite being a fan of this series. To be perfectly honest with you, I really can't recommend it. Still, it's pretty good for a kind of look at RTS history, but as a game, it's really not that great. So thanks for watching.